Everybody, welcome to Trading Caps exclusive analysis. In today's video, we're assessing GameStop, GME, and Roaring Kitty. The latest news, what's transpiring? Well, if we look at the news headlines, obviously we're going to see Roaring Kitty GameStop stake grows to 9 million shares. So he exercised some of his options, sold them, and now upped his stake, netting a nice little gain on his options contracts, raising almost doubling the amount of common shares he originally held was roughly about 5 million. Now he's raised it to 9 million and change. So just a little over 9 million common shares long for Roaring Kitty. That's a pretty big position in the overall stock itself. So obviously now the fact that he doesn't have that theta, being the options contracts were expiring next week, June 21st, he really doesn't have to worry about time. He's got a lot of time now to orchestrate something clever, potentially another ploy on social media, maybe another live stream, maybe new videos, maybe another series on GameStop, maybe another deep value series in the sense, because now being the fact that he has over 9 million shares, pretty much matching the number of shares that Ryan Cohen had, that's a pretty significant event. Whether or not it's just some sort of a coincidence that he's trying to signal to the apes and the meme stock chasers because Ryan Cohen had the same amount when they started a short squeeze, time will tell whether or not that's going to come into fruition. But one thing's for certain, we can just look at the chart and try to dissect what's happening. Obviously, this was the huge initial blow-off move. Ever since that blow-off move, we've actually been putting in higher lows, higher lows, higher lows, but we haven't officially taken out that high. So we're forming this very, very powerful wedge pattern. And whichever way the wedge breaks, if it's to the downside, if it's to the upside, is going to be an epic, epic trading opportunity, in my opinion. So for the time being, I still think there's a chance we can oscillate inside the wedge. Now, the momentum, believe it or not, is still technically in favor to the upside because you're bouncing off of the support. You had a nice positive 14% rally session today. You're potentially setting up an inverse head and shoulders. It hasn't triggered yet. And full disclosure, I don't have any positions at the moment, but I have been scalping this one intraday because it's such immense volatility. I haven't been shorting it quite yet. I've taken a few put plays which have worked out nicely, but mainly just trading it on the long side. But take a look at this inverse head and shoulders, left shoulder, head, right shoulder. If you break this neckline, that suggests a really, really astonishing move that could even happen within 1 to 2 days. That takes us back to $44. And sorry, I actually stand corrected. I do have a small call position which was already hedged and taken profits on the put play. So I have a small hedged call position writing $40 calls expiring sometime in June as well, a little later in June. But nevertheless, I do think that GME can and is likely still going to try to make another attempt higher. The timing aspect is hard. It's obviously super, super risky. The stock could collapse easily 50% or more. But when we look at the amount of shares that now brokerages are having to scramble and get to fulfill the extra, 5 million and change, 4 million and change that Roaring Kitty has now acquired, that's a large amount. Wolverine, E-Trade, whoever has to start scrambling those shares is going to have to do so quickly. That's potentially what we saw today, a nice little buy program coming in by other institutions to kind of protect their downside, hedge their position, go delta neutral. But nevertheless, who's to say Roaring Kitty isn't now starting to trim some of these common shares and maybe roll them into later strikes and later dates, which could put a little bit more upward pressure and build a little bit more of a momentum base here. So what I'm seeing on the technical chart, I really want to take the weekly chart into fruition. First of all, the weekly chart we're sitting right above that weekly 200 MA in blue. And what's really, really fascinating here is you're actually starting to get a little bit of a crossover of potentially the weekly 20 and 50. So the weekly 20 and 50 are potentially trying to cross over. And take a look at the last time we really got that crossover. It was really down here, the start of the 2020 short squeeze. So we haven't really seen that weekly MA crossover since 2020. And who's to say the reaction after that crossover was an epic, epic squeeze. Who's to say we don't see another blistering move to the high side? There's certainly a potential. Nothing's a guarantee. Obviously, we're all being speculative here. The company's, fundamentals are not the greatest. It wouldn't justify a move, but stranger things have happened in the equity markets. And when you try to think of things logically, sometimes it just doesn't work. So at the moment, we are putting in a potential base here to actually try to make another move to the high side here. So I'm looking for momentum longs in the near term. And then until we break out of this wedge, I do think it's safe to kind of short this upper range resistance, but just keep in mind, shorting this name overnight has extreme risk, very, very extreme risk, especially if you're trying to do with common shares. This could squeeze you out very, very quickly on a potential squeeze if some sort of catalyst gets announced. And when you have a major influencer like Roaring Kitty, who now doesn't have time against him, has hundreds of millions of dollars in common shares just sitting, anything can happen. There's going to be another deep value event, in my opinion, and it's just a matter of staying on the overall trend. So it's going to be an interesting session to see how the delivery of those shares take place on Friday. I'm certainly curious and will be watching this name pretty much in the pre-market and regular trading session for ample opportunity. And one thing's for certain, I still see the fact that this little volume gap was never filled. It came very, very close. I still think, technically speaking, there may be one more little attempt at pushing through that vicinity. On that note, please give this video a like down below, and we'll see you on the charts a little bit later.